Hello there, I'm Cynthia and welcome to my quilt lab where I'm working on this lovely block today. It's part of the Block of the Month series of the Solare quilt by Banyan Batiks, created by the amazing duo at Be Quilting, and of course I work for Adirondack Quilts. Check in the description below for all those links to find out more information about all that stuff. It is month number 9. We have this lovely right here, a bunch of them. So let's dig in and find out what month 9 has in store for us. Let's go. All right, so this block right here is called it's the large 54, 40, or fight. That's a lot of F's. We're making 8 of these, and you can see them sprinkled along near the corners. And I know what you're looking at. This is the large version, so there will be a small version coming up real soon. But let's focus on the big one first. Let's dig in and talk a little bit about what fabrics we're going to be using. All right, we got some fabric number 2. That's that pretty dark navy down here in the corner. We're making some half square triangles with it, along with fabric number 3, and you see this in a lot of different places. It's in the half square triangles, it's in the little 4 block squares, and then it's in the triangle blocks as well. So there's a lot of different cutting for this. So I'm going to talk about that just a little bit more in depth in just a second. Moving forward, you're going to see fabric number 4. That's that pretty little orange right there. Lots of little strips about that. And yeah, that's our oh, and how could I forget our lovely fabric 5? Oh, I always want to leave out my templates. Fabric number 5 is these beautiful kind of teal color triangles. A lot of stuff. Let me talk about some of the cutting that we're going to be doing so I can give you a few tips here. So with fabric number 2 and fabric number 3, you're going to see 4 cuts of 4 squares at 3 7/8. That's to make these half square triangles, and the 7/8 means it's just going to be 1 cut. So let me just throw out a little tip right here at the beginning. If you want to bump that 3 7/8 right up to a 4, not a bad idea, because when you do the half square triangles, you're going to have a little extra wiggle room to square down and make those nice and pretty. And in the fabric 2, you get 8.5 square piece of fabric, so you're going to have plenty of room to do 4 little squares. Okay, so don't worry, if you want to bump up to that 4-inch instead of 3 7/8, not a bad idea. So let's talk about fabric number 3. There's going to be some width of fabric cutting first. We're going to be doing that to pair up with this orange. So I recommend doing that first, and then doing a strip of the 3 7/8 or 4 inches, so you can get your 4 blocks out of there, and then cut down to the next length, which is the 3 1/2. So that's this corner right here. And you're going to have 8 of those because we're doing 8 blocks. And then it's template cutting. That's right, we have templates again. This template right here has a triangle, and you can trace your template out on a piece of acrylic sheeting if you want. You can use paper templates, whatever. You're going to be cutting just a bunch of those templates. I think, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 times 8 is 32. Yay, quilt math. 32 of these. I did do with the paper piece. Like if you've watched any of my previous videos, I created a paper piecing template. A little sneak preview for a few minutes from now. And of course, I'll talk through that again if you'd prefer to do a paper piece version, and you can make your own templates as well. Moving on, fabric 4 is just a bunch of strips again by the width of fabric, and then of course the last piece is templates. And the nice thing about Batiks, so it'll show in the cutting template that you do half one size and half reversible, but the fun thing about Batiks is, especially with this one, there's not really a correct side. So don't worry, if you cut too much of one side, you could always turn it over. That's why I love Batiks, because it takes kind of the guesswork out. So, hey, let's get in and talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing here. All right, so the first step is right into those template blocks, and you'll see that you're going to get on the template page just the K side up and reverse, and the J, that's the big triangle there in the center. There's 4 of these per block. So if you want to just cut this out and use your paper template to then trace onto your fabric, you can. You can also get some acrylic template to drop over the top of it, trace around it. I will say that you want to make sure that you're really doing these little dog ear points. You see how it's diagonal, it's not a straight 90 degrees anywhere. That's because those are going to meet up with each other when you go to stitch them. So this is an option, the acrylic. And I, of course, if you've watched any of my other videos, I like paper piecing, and you'll need 4 of them, one for the north, south, east, west to do this. And if you look in your instructions, you'll see that this finished triangle, the finished version, is going to be 3, excuse me. So the unfinished with all of those, you know, seam allowances is 3.5. So you can make a copy of this and tape them together so you get something that looks like this guy right here. Or what I did is I just grabbed my ruler, grabbed a piece of paper, and I just drew it. So I know it has to be 3 in that center, so there's one side. Here's the other side. Then I go back around and I make sure that I add my 1/4 inch seam allowance. Other side as well. All 4 sides. And now this point here in the center meets halfway through the block. So halfway between 3 inches is 1.5 inches, and it goes right to the corner. So what I do is I measure 1.5 inches in on that inside block, because that's the finish. So 1.5, there's the half mark, and I just give myself a little notch to aim to. And then I take that notch to both opposite corners, so I have the diagonal of that bigger triangle. There's one side, and there's the other. All right, and so when you go to piece it, you put the middle piece here as number 1, and then the 2 wings as 2 and 3. Make several copies of this, or if you want to draw them out a bunch of times, hey, it's your quilt. I made copies and I printed it out on the Doak paper. This is a special paper piecing paper. It's sort of like newsprint, so it has a little bit of a rougher feel to it. It's also a little thinner, and it tears much easier because, of course, you're going to be tearing the paper off of the back when you're finished with these. But if you don't have this paper, don't worry, you can just use regular office paper too. You just really want to make sure that you're shortening that stitch length so you get a lot of perforation holes, so that makes the paper easier to tear away. So let's talk about this block, both of the template and the paper piecing, and I'll be back in just a second. All right, so the template version and the paper piece version are kind of put together in the same way, only you don't have paper on one. So let me explain. So you have the J, okay, I'll turn this right side down, and then the K and the K reverse. So basically, you take your K, you flip it over, same pieces together, and you do this stitch right here. Press it open, and then flip, and do the other side. Make sure it's squared to that 3.5, and the same process is pretty much the same for this other side as well. If you've watched any of my videos before, you know when I'm paper piecing, I like to fold all my seams beforehand because it makes life a little bit easier. And I've already cut down my fabric to kind of roughly the same sizes, of a little bit bigger than what our templates were. So I need one of those center pieces, which is that lovely kind of gray. Put that right there. I'm going to take a little pin just to hold it in place while I turn everything over. And then I'm going to take a piece of the blue and line it up next to it so that when it flips open, it flips all the way and covers that entire little piece of paper. Throw a pin in to hold it all in place. And when I take this to the sewing machine, I'm going to start right here at that little corner, that little top of that triangle, and I'm going to sew all the way down, and I'm going to actually go through that seam allowance. I'm going to take it to the iron, I'm going to press it open, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing over on that other side. Now you'll also know that I often have a lovely little ruler called the Add a Quarter Plus. I love paper piecing, and it's a great way to just trim off all of my extra 1/4 of an inch, both here and on that second one. Super easy, super fast, but if you don't have that, no worries. Just use your regular ruler. And you can see me do this in a bunch of different videos. I love paper piecing, and I know you've been watching, so I won't bore you with this fun little piece because we've done this shape several times now. You're going to be making a slew of these. There's 4 for each block. 4 times 8 is 32. So if you have them a day, do all your paper piecing or your template cutouts all in one fell swoop. That way you can get them out of the way and we can move on to the next stop. I'll take a couple pictures of this process, throw them in the video, and then we'll meet up again and we'll talk about the next step. Let's get going. Alright, step 2 is all about making the little 4 squares from that block. You'll see there's 3 of them. And the way you do that is you're going to grab those 2-inch strips. You'll have 2 of the orange and 2 of that kind of light blue, and you're going to pair one with the other long ways. So do that seam all the way down, press towards that dark side. There we go. Give it a nice firm press. And then we're going to subcut this into 2-inch kind of rectangles. So what I like to do is, first things first, take that selvage piece off because you don't need that. Often that selvage is a slightly different weave anyway, and you don't want that in your quilt. And then we're going to do 2-inch strips. So what I like to do is I like to put a line right on top of where that fold is. That way I know I'm going to get a nice straight cut, because maybe sometimes your seam is a little wavy and you have to straighten it up a little bit as you go. That's okay, because this is, you'll have a bunch of fabric left over. My goodness, I got almost through all 8 of the blocks before I needed to get this one. So subcut, you're going to want 48 of these. Once you have 48 of them, then you pair them together. And because you pressed towards that dark side, when you go to pin these together, they're going to nest up really nicely when you take them to the sewing machine. Throw a little pin in there. I like putting a pin through the middle seam. That way I know I'm going to stay on course. If you want, you could put one on either other seam, and then as you're stitching, you take each pins out. Take this to the machine. You're going to be making 24 4 patches. So they'll look a little something like this one. And I did just a little bit of squaring up. It should be a 3.5 unfinished. And you're going to need 3 of these 4 patches for each block. And I liked to press that last seam open because I felt that this was just a little bulky to have everything on one side. That was just me. Like, you know, no quilting police here. If you feel like pressing to one side or the other, do what works for you. This is just what worked for me. So you need 3 of these. You have your little triangles. There's one more block to make before we start prepping the final blocks. Let's grab those big blue ones and the big light blue ones. Remember, those are the 3 7/8 or the 4-inch ones. So let's grab those because we're going to pair those with each other. So there's those blocks. Like I said, if you want to bump that 3 7/8 up to 4, not a bad idea because that just means you'll have enough fabric to square back down to get to the correct size of block. We're turning this into a half square triangle. No waste, half square triangles. So as the directions say, we're going to draw a line down that middle diagonal. And I'm using one of my handy dandy little quilter's rule here. That slotted spot is going to be my center. And it's a 1/4 inch on either side. I like to draw all 3 lines. That way I know where I'm going to stitch. There are several of these rulers out on the market. Some of them have this slotted center and some don't. I'll put mine in the link below. And there you go. So we're going to take this to the machine. We're going to stitch a 1/4 inch to either side of that center line. Then we're going to chop it in half, open them up, and we'll have some half square triangle. But don't you worry, I'm going to take some pictures as I go, and I'll see you in just a moment. Alright, so once you have your 2 half square triangles, you want to make sure it's unfinished at 3.5. So if you did the original at 4 inches, you will definitely have to square down a little bit. The 3 7/8 should come out to 3.5. I still like to get rid of my dog ears because I like pretty blocks when I put them together. Alright. That's step 4. Let's move on and put this puppy together. So grab all the blocks. All right, so you have that fun little template or paper piecing. You have your 3 4 patches. You have your half square triangles, and then you should have an extra block of just that plain. So let's lay everything out the way it's supposed to look so we have an idea of what we're aiming for. Let's see, those 4 teal ones are in the north, south, east, west. It's pointing towards the middle of the block. That half square triangle is going to go in the bottom. And don't worry, that second one is for another block, so you can set it aside for right now. And that dark corner is pointing down and away. And then we fill in with our 4 patches, and you should have kind of an orange stripe going up through the middle. All right, so you should be able to see the rows. We're going to put everything together in rows, and then we're going to put the rows together in its final block. So let me grab that final block just so that I can show you what I was doing. So there's the final block. Let me flip her over. I opened up all of the seams. I'm not sure if it says to do this in the instructions. Let me just take a quick peek. Nope, but I did it anyway. I opened them up because there's a lot of bulkiness that's going to happen, especially where this point meets that seam right there. Remember, that's the 1/4 of an inch. So that 1/4 of an inch should be right on that seam for that middle square. And it's going to happen 4 times where those points go in. All right, so you know what to do. Piece together in rows. Piece together those rows so you get the final block. You want to watch out for those 1/4 of an inches. You want to put pins in at those corners to make sure everything matches up nicely. Let's get stitching. I'll take a few pictures as I go, and I'll see you at the end with another finished block. Let's get stitching. And there we go, a nice finished block. Remember, you got to do that 8 times. You want 8 of these blocks. Give it a little trim up if you need to, you know, square up those edges, and then set this guy aside, take a little break, have a little stretch, and move on to the next month. And I hope you'll tune in for that time with me in my quilt lab. This is Cynthia saying bye-bye, keep quilting, and hey, give me a little thumbs up. Have a good one, guys. We'll see you next month. Bye-bye.